Alright, these are your notes for section 7.4 on trig ratios, or trig functions. You use those interchangeably. So our first question here is, what is a trig function? Well, a trig function is the ratio, and this is where we get the name trig ratio. That's why we use them interchangeably. Remember, a ratio is a fraction, so it's the ratio of the lengths of two sides of a right triangle. Okay? Now there's a couple important things in that definition. First one is ratio. Ratio means fraction again. So for our answers for this particular video and the examples in this video, this section, are going to be fractions. Now we can make those into decimals, so you got to read the directions as to whether we're using fractions or decimals. And we're using two sides. That's the second important thing. It's going to be two of the three sides of a right triangle. Right triangle is the third part. So it has to be a right triangle in order to use trig, and we're going to use two of the three sides to make a fraction. Okay? Before we get into what trig functions are, how we use them, there's a couple of vocabulary words we need to know. And these vocabulary words are based off an acute angle of a right triangle. The words are opposite, adjacent, and hypotenuse. Now, opposite refers to the side across from the angle, the acute angle that we would be talking about. Now, it's the side of the triangle, and I'm going to underline across, which means it's across the triangle. It cannot be touching the angle. Adjacent refers to the side next to the angle. Okay? Now, when we're talking about an acute angle, two sides will be touching the angle. It's the side that's not the hypotenuse, which is our third vocabulary word. It's the longest side of the triangle, and it's the side across from the right angle. Okay, and again, it's going to be the longest side. Whenever we talk about adjacent, we never want to make the adjacent one the hypotenuse, because those are two different ideas, okay? The adjacent has to be one of the legs, one of the other two sides of the right triangle. Well, we've got a triangle here, and we're going to refer off of angle A down here. A for acute, that's one of the acute angles of the triangle. We're going to label the opposite, adjacent, and hypotenuse. Well, opposite, again, is the one across from the angle. So our opposite side would be over here, the side that does not touch that angle. The adjacent side is the side next to it that's not the hypotenuse, so it would be down here. I'm going to abbreviate that one. The adjacent side and our hypotenuse is this one. The longest side of the triangle, the one across from the right angle, the one opposite the right angle. So those are the words, that's how we would figure those out, those vocabulary words for the right triangle here, when we're talking about trig ratios. Okay? Again, opposite is the one across from the angle, adjacent, the one next to the angle, and the hypotenuse is the longest side of the triangle, the side that's across from the right angle. Alright, now that we have those vocabulary words down, let's get into what the trig functions actually are. There are three of them that we're going to learn. The first one is called sine, and it's abbreviated S-I-N, and that will be the button on your calculator. We don't say sin, we say sine, okay? And that is one of my pet peeves, is people that say sin instead of sine. So the sine button on the calculator is S-I-N. Second trig function also has a button on the calculator. It's cosine, and it's abbreviated C-O-S. Now we do not say cos. For the same reason we don't say sin, we say cosine, okay? So sine is sin, cosine, cos, both buttons on the calculator. Third one is tangent. And tangent is abbreviated TAN, and we don't say tan, we say tangent, okay? Now again, those are 3 buttons on the calculator. You need to bring to class a calculator that has those 3 buttons on it. It's important that you do that because what we'll learn in class, we're going to build upon this video. What we learn in class, you're going to have to use those buttons for. This particular video, you don't need the calculator for it. We're going to talk about what those mean. But for class next time, you need to bring a calculator that has sine, cosine, and tangent buttons on it. Alright, now, I'm going to give you a phrase to remember. And then we're going to abbreviate it. I'm going to give you a short little, a second phrase. You can remember 2 phrases. A phrase in a sentence. That's what I'm going to give you. The phrase is SOHCAHTOA. Some people like to remember SOHCAHTOA to help them remember their trig functions. I'll explain why here in a second. SOHCAHTOA is one way to remember them. Some people also like to remember the sentence. Some old hippie came a-hoppin' through our apartment. Now they do the same thing. SOHCAHTOA basically takes the first letter of every word in this sentence. Some old hippie, S-O-H, came a-hoppin', C-A-H, through our apartment, T-O-A. That gives us SOHCAHTOA. Either one of those you can remember, and that's going to help you set up these trig functions. Okay? So let's talk about the setup now. The setup, again, is based off an acute angle of the triangle. And I have a picture over here with angle A. All of these are going to be based off angle A. So if we're going to talk about sine of A, we set it up like this. This is the SO part, S-O-H. The sine of angle A would be the opposite side over the hypotenuse. Now those would have values on them in our triangle. Right now we're just using the words. When we get to the examples, they'll have numbers on them, and we set up this fraction where we put the number that's on the opposite side over the number that's for the hypotenuse. And that would be the ratio, that would be the fraction for the sine of A. Okay, now it's in relation to this angle down here, so make sure that you go off that's opposite A. The next one is cosine. In cosine, if we're going to talk about the cosine of A, it's going to be written like this, C-A-H. That means the adjacent side over the hypotenuse. Okay, the side next to A over the hypotenuse, the longest side of the triangle. We would take the values for the adjacent and the hypotenuse sides, and then we would make a fraction out of them. Okay? Last one, tangent. You can probably guess what it's going to be. Tangent of A, we set it up T-O-A. O stands for opposite. A stands for adjacent. Okay, tangent does not use the hypotenuse. We would take the opposite value and the adjacent value for the sides, and we would make a fraction out of those. Now that's the setup, okay? I would remember S-O-H, C-A-H, and T-O-A written like that. That's going to help a lot of you remember how to set up the fractions, set up the ratios. So that's one way to remember it. If you're going to remember SOHCAHTOA. If you're going to remember some old hippie came a-hopping through our apartment, remember that that's how you would set them up. First letter in each three-word phrase is a big letter, and then the other two make a fraction. Okay, those are your notes. This is how to set up. This is what the definitions are for trig ratios. If you have any questions, watch this video again. If not, go on to the second video where we're going to look at some examples.